Longer deployments at sea, ship breakdowns, and questions over morale. The US Navy under the Trump administration is facing mounting challenges. But have those challenges reached breaking point? Is the US Navy overstretched? It's what we want to discuss today. And this is why. We've all heard of the troubles aboard this ship, the aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln, that's been deployed continuously at sea for more than 240 days. That's more than 8 months. It's currently supporting operations against Iran, and there have been reports of mental health and supply issues on board. It's set to be relieved by the USS George Washington soon. Then there was the deployment of this ship, the aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, deployed at sea for 326 days in support of operations against Venezuela first and then Iran, the longest such deployment for an aircraft carrier since the Vietnam War. Now, bear in mind that the recommended deployment of US aircraft carrier groups is 7 months or around 210 days. But it isn't just about aircraft carriers. This ship, the guided missile destroyer, the USS Benfold, reportedly spent 4 days adrift in the South China Sea without power in July. An Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, it lost power after what the US Navy called, quote, an engineering casualty involving its generators, unquote. So what does all of this mean? Let's try and get some understanding from Professor Kevin Rowlands from the think tank, the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI for short. Professor Rowlands, thanks for making the time. Now, we're talking of extended, in fact, record-breaking deployments of aircraft carriers, a naval blockade of Iranian ports, the last aircraft carrier in Asia being redeployed. I mean, taken together, is it fair to say that the US Navy is overstretched at the moment?
I think it probably is fair to say that the US Navy is overstretched. It's the biggest navy in the world, or it certainly was until very recently. And the Chinese Navy has gained hull numbers. But of course, the Chinese Navy doesn't have the same structures, and it's not built around aircraft carriers in the same way. So the US Navy is huge. It's got a lot of ships, but it's now got a huge number of commitments in different theatres around the world. And it's not following now its own pattern of maintenance, training, deployment, and these deployments are getting longer and longer, and that has an impact. So yeah, I think it is overstretched.
I mean, there's a number of things to discuss there. I want to talk about the Chinese Navy here. I also want to talk about what the strategy is, if at all, behind these US naval deployments. But let's just try and dwell on your experience as well, because you've served in the Royal Navy and you retired as captain, if I'm not wrong. You spent 20 years at sea. What is it like as a human being, as a sailor on a ship of war, to be out there without a port call for more than 8 months at a stretch?
Well, it's massively difficult on individuals and on families. Of course, we in the West, we're all volunteers. We choose that lifestyle. We want to go to sea, and we want to be part of a navy. We want that camaraderie, and we want to do the work that is good for our countries and defending our people. That's all great. But when you come down to the nitty-gritty of daily life and the problems that still happen at home, and families and children and parents and relationships, all that has an impact. And of course, people today, whether it's right or wrong, but it's just a fact, I think, people today have more expectation of being in touch and being in contact with their families constantly. So if you're going away and you think you're going away for 6 or 7 months, and then it turns into 7 or 8 or 9 months, and you don't know when you're coming back, and you don't have any break in that time, you don't have a port call to let your hair down and see a part of the world. If it's the same thing day in, day out, that has an impact. And it's not just on the sailors, it's on the families back home. And I think that's really important.
I mean, it's interesting you say that because it's not just about, I mean, we're talking at the moment about the aircraft carrier deployments in the US Navy that have carried on for such extended periods of time. But I wanted to sort of go beyond just that one aircraft carrier, for example. I mean, if you're in the rest of the Navy, I don't know, if you're on a destroyer or if you're on a missile boat and you're serving in the Navy, and then you hear about your comrades serving on aircraft carriers who haven't been able to visit a port, basically visit land, for more than 8 months. What does that do to your morale in another arm of the Navy when you see that your colleagues in another part of the Navy are going through this kind of a deployment?
Well, you wonder what's going on, and you wonder if it's going to happen to you next, and it probably is happening to you at that time. I think we should remember that an aircraft carrier, especially with the US Navy, doesn't just deploy on its own. It deploys with escorts. It deploys with support ships and destroyers to protect it. And in the normal way of operating, the normal way of planning for deployments, those ships work together, they train together, they do a workup, and they all deploy together. So it should be that the escorts, the destroyer squadron that is with the carrier, stays with the carrier, and so they would be suffering the same deployment lengths. However, I think what we see happening with the US at the moment is those escorts, those destroyers, are being rotated a little more regularly. They're still doing very long deployments, but they're being rotated out and new ones coming in. So that may relieve the strain a little bit on the people on board each of those ships, but it doesn't do very much for operational effectiveness and capability, because every time a ship leaves and a new one comes in, they've got to get used to working with that carrier again. So they need to, that will have an impact on how effective that group is. So not only is this affecting morale and the ability of and retention, the ability of sailors to do their job, it'll over time it'll reduce the fighting effectiveness of that navy, of that group.
But it's not just about the sailors, is it? Because, I mean, these ships, if they've been out for so long on the high seas, they undergo wear and tear. I mean, they basically need to come back to port for maintenance. And I wonder if that takes up even more time. And the longer that these ships spend time in dry dock and they're away from service in the rest of the Navy, if that affects the operational efficiency of the Navy as well.
Yeah, definitely it does. And let me answer that in two ways. First of all, many of us have cars. If we drive our car constantly and don't service it, don't do routine maintenance, don't check the tires, don't clean the windscreen, it's going to take longer the next time it goes into for a service. It's going to cost more money. You need to run some things in an efficient and judicious manner. Turning that onto ships and aircraft carriers in particular, the US Navy should be running something like a 3-year rotation for any single aircraft carrier. So in a 3-year period, it'll go through a period of maintenance. It'll be training and working up for deployment. It will deploy for around 7 months. It will come back. There'll be leave periods, and it'll go into maintenance again. So that's a sustainable cycle that should keep those, the 11 carriers that the US Navy has, should be able to keep them going indefinitely. But when that deployment goes beyond the plan, it goes beyond 7 months, it goes into 8 or 9 or 10 or even longer, then that's going to have an impact on everything else, on the maintenance and the repairs and the readiness that needs the work that needs to be done in port. That will be more expensive and it will take longer. And then you have a knock-on effect of not just on that ship and its replacement, but on all the other ships in the fleet and the repair facilities as well. But they need to, they're all planned, they're all scheduled.
Let's stay on the subject of aircraft carriers, because I think it is a symptom of what is perhaps happening with the U.S. Navy at the moment. And I want to talk particularly about the USS Abraham Lincoln, because Donald Trump has also been asked about that. Donald Trump has been commenting about it as well. I think recently he commented that the Lincoln hasn't been, quote, nearly long enough. The deployment hasn't been nearly long enough. And he was also responding to a question on this on Monday as well. I just want to sort of play what he said, and then we'll come back and I'll have a follow-up question to that.
Is there enough food on on the USS Lincoln?
Yeah, it is. That was a CNN fake report. The Lincoln has been out there for a period of time, good period of time. But over the years, we've had them out there much longer. I was at a group meeting, and an admiral came up to see me over the weekend. And it was at a big group, and he happened to be an admiral retired. He said, I've been on ships that are out there much longer than that, sir. And I know people on the Lincoln, they say it's beautifully maintained and beautifully taken care of. And other people went out and they found out to be true. It was fake news reporting from CNN.
Do comments like that, Professor, give the impression that Donald Trump or his administration are taking seriously the concerns and the issues around these extended deployments?
I think if I was a sailor on board USS Abraham Lincoln or one of the other ships, and I'd seen that clip and I'd heard that, I'd probably get the impression that the US president, the commander-in-chief, was paying more attention to retired armchair admirals, who like to call them. Maybe I'm one of those now, commentating from the safety of of London, or my office, or my home. Listen to those people rather than listening to the reality of the impact on the lives of the sailors who are serving today. Of course, in the past, maybe in the Vietnam War and the Second World War, ships have done longer deployments. It's true, it's a fact. But is that relevant to what's happening today? There's a huge difference between the experiences you have if you're fighting a total war, if you are expecting to go away and perhaps never to come home, and today's experience where you sign up, you join the Navy for a certain length of time, you expect to deploy, but you expect to come home, you expect to be able to have contact with your family. You don't expect to go out before Christmas in one year and not know when you're coming home, and the impact that has on you. So I'm not sure those comments are helpful. They may be factually correct in some ways, but it still needs to be looked at in a broader sense. What are they trying to achieve? What's the best way of achieving it? And what is the impact in the longer term? Because this is not just if you run a ship too hard or too long, that's not just a short-term problem. It becomes a longer-term problem that you need to address.
And I do want to talk about the longer term and the larger U.S. strategy at play, but then just bear with me a moment, because it also has to be said that the U.S. Central Command Commander, Admiral Brad Cooper, did visit the Lincoln some days back. You were talking about the president, but Brad Cooper was, in fact, on the Lincoln. He praised the crew for the work that they were doing. And that just led me to this question as to how you would read that. I mean, do you think when it comes to the U.S. naval leadership, the officer cadre that is leading the U.S. Navy, is that aligned necessarily with the ideas that the Trump administration or the president himself has on how the Navy should be used and what the Navy should be doing? Or do you think that there is a bit of a difference there? Because you heard what Donald Trump was saying earlier, and here you have the CENTCOM commander visiting the troops, so to speak. They're all sailors, we know, but and talking to them and showing up and listening to their concerns. Do you think that there is a bit of a difference there between the civilian leadership of the country and the naval leadership?
I'm not sure that there is a difference there. I think, thankfully, even now, still in the United States and in our countries in Western Europe, we have hopefully a healthy military-civil relationship. The politicians in power, if they're legitimately in power, if they give direction and give orders, and they want them carried out, then it is the duty of the armed forces to do that, as long as it is morally acceptable and legal. And I think whatever we think of the war in the Middle East on a personal level, I think what the Navy is doing, what the U.S. Navy is doing, is legal and can be legitimately executed. So I think people like Admiral Cooper, they are using the resources that they've been allocated, the ships that they've been given to accomplish the task that they've been asked to achieve, whether that be blockade or strikes against Iran and so on. If they were given more resources, they would probably do it in a different way. But you plan and you do the job with the resources that you have. If Admiral Cooper had 3 or 4 carriers at his disposal, then he may choose to rotate them through, have fresh crews, use them in a different way for different mission sets. But at the moment, because of the stretch, he hasn't, and he's using what he's got at the moment to his best ability.
Speaking of this being a stretch and resources and fresh crews, there's reports the USS George Washington has set sail from Asia to relieve the Lincoln, and the AP is saying that was the last remaining US aircraft carrier in the Pacific. And I wonder if that is indeed the case, if that significantly weakens US naval presence in Asia.
I do believe that is the case. I believe that I don't think we need to say the whole of the Pacific, because of course the west coast of the US is a Pacific coastline. I think we're talking about the Indo-Pacific region as a theatre. We're looking at responses to China, any other activity in that region, the defense of Japan, South Korea, and so on. By taking the last remaining aircraft carrier from that region and redeploying it to the Middle East does leave a gap, and that's a political and a military decision. It's a choice. What I find interesting is that the US used to keep a pretty sizable naval presence in the Middle East, and there was a conscious pivot to the Indo-Pacific for probably obvious strategic reasons, and the strategy had been to reduce the number of ships, of platforms, of people in the Middle East, and redeploy them and have a stronger presence in the Indo-Pacific region, particularly facing China. If we're now in a situation where there's been an about turn and those ships that would have been in the Indo-Pacific are now heading back to the Middle East to do their jobs there, then the strategy, de facto, the strategy has changed. We are seeing a different posture for different reasons, but I don't think the overall strategic picture has changed. I think most American commentators and military leaders would see, I think they call China the pacing threat. They see China as this pacing threat that they need to respond to. Well, if you're not there, it's pretty difficult to respond.
We were talking about long-term strategy, so help us understand what the long-term strategy here is, because we keep hearing different things coming out of the US, right? I mean, is the Western Hemisphere the priority? Is it the Middle East, or is it indeed the Indo-Pacific, where China has been building its navy, and what China has the strongest navy in the world at the moment, at least in terms of the number of vessels it has? So which is it? What is the long-term strategy here of the US?
It's a very good question, and I think it's something that I would say is evolving over time. For the past decade and a half, the focus for the US and the strategy had been the primary theatre was the Indo-Pacific. So it was looking at China as this pacing threat and building up military capability in that region as the primary. At the same time, of course, being an active member of NATO and contributing to the defence of the North Atlantic, Europe, the High North, and of course the principal threat actor there would be Russia. So it was a pivot towards Asia and the Indo-Pacific, a little less on Europe, and we've been feeling the consequences of that in recent years, of course. And then the new national security strategy that the US came out with about a year ago, after Trump came back into office, then emphasized the Western Hemisphere and the Americas. So there are some contradictions there. Not necessarily complete friction. I think it's understandable. I think the Trump worldview on this is, defense at home and safeguarding American interests in the Americas and the Western Hemisphere, then leaning to the Indo-Pacific, and I think Europe comes a distant third in that. What then throws all that into difficulty is when you have episodic conflicts and wars in different parts of the world, for instance, the Middle East, which then dislodges the strategy, and you have to rethink. If you are having a strategy, if it's going to be worth having, then you probably need to stick to it and resource it adequately. But if you're responding to anything else that's happening around the world, being the world policeman or having adventures in the Middle East, then things will change.
So we began this interview, Professor, with you sort of agreeing that the U.S. Navy appears to be a little overstretched, to say the least. And there's also this somewhat of a confused strategy as to where exactly this pivot is, or is it stationary somewhere, where we are going with it. And therefore, I put to you my final question. Does it appear that Donald Trump is himself the biggest threat to the U.S. Navy?
I would try to steer away from politics on this. I think, of course, the US president is the commander-in-chief, and he is giving the orders. I think there is a confused picture, and I think the president's actions and words, his rhetoric, his priorities don't always fit in to the long-term strategy that has been articulated in various strategy documents and plans for numerous years. So I think Trump is a here and now transactionalist. He will want to respond to things that are happening in the world. He wants to, in his view, make America great again. If that means taking action today, then that is what he will do. I think there is less understanding and less thought going into what that then means for the longer term. What does that mean for the US Navy, for the next president and the one after that? If everything is if the ships and the people are exhausted, then that does become a difficulty. But for now, I think he's concentrating on the issues of the day as he sees them.
We'll leave it for the moment. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Professor Kevin Rowlands from RUSI. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Right, so tell us what you think. Is the US Navy overstretched? Is Trump leading the Navy in the right way? Let us know in the comments, and thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.